Hello and welcome to Psych Boost. In this video we'll be talking about learning theory and how learning theory can be used to explain attachment. Our key terms will be cupboard love and two terms you're likely familiar with already, operant and classical conditioning, and we'll finish off by discussing some evaluations. So let's explain attachment through learning theory. So there's a term, and the term is called cupboard love. Cupboard love is a concept that we love or we're attached to our mothers for a very simple reason. She gives us food, and all that's happened is we've learned to associate our parent with the fact that when they're around they give us food and meet other basic physiological needs. This is a learning theory approach, so the concepts are all behaviour, including attachment behaviours, are explained by the concepts of classical and operant conditioning. So the term classical conditioning is learning by association. You have two stimuli, we have a neutral and we have an unconditioned. In this case we start off with food as an unconditioned stimulus. An unconditioned stimulus, if you remember, is a stimulus in which you'll have an unconditioned response. You don't need to be trained as a baby to find milk pleasurable. Now at first mother's just there when you get milk, but because mother is presented at the same time as food is, eventually the stimulus of mother stops being the neutral stimulus and becomes the conditioned stimulus. And whenever mother appears, then pleasure is felt. She's become associated with the pleasure of the food. Another learning explanation for infant behaviours is operant conditioning. So operant conditioning is learning through your consequences, learning through trial and error. There are certain patterns of reinforcements which make behaviours more or less likely to happen. So let's talk about one particular behaviour, the behaviour of crying. Babies get hungry and babies cry. If you're a baby and you're hungry and you just so happen to be crying, and then your parents, in an attempt to stop you crying, give you food, you're likely to develop the understanding that crying leads to food. There's been a positive reinforcement there, so you're more likely to cry again when you feel hungry. Also, reinforcement has happened on the parents as a negative reinforcement. The parents have learnt that if the baby cries, which is an unpleasant experience, one way to stop the baby from crying, one way to remove the negative stimulus, is to provide food. So there are two processes, classical and operant conditioning, which can help us to understand the interactions between parents and babies. When we talk about attachment as a drive for babies, we might suggest they're a secondary drive. So babies want to be attached, but only because it's linked to a primary drive. So a drive is a desire to complete an action. They're instinctual, such as the drive to eat to relieve hunger, the drive to sleep to reduce tiredness, and the drive for sex for reproduction. And these are based on human biological needs. Now secondary drives are still desires to complete an action, but these are due to learned processes. A good example of a secondary drive is the drive for money. Money doesn't satisfy any biological need. You don't need money to survive. But we've learned that money can buy other things which satisfy primary drives. Money can buy food which satisfies hunger. Money can buy resources which might attract a mate. So when we talk about attachment being a secondary drive, we've learned that the process of attachment is something we can use to satisfy one of our primary drives. So becoming attached to an individual allows us ultimately to satisfy our primary drive of getting food to satisfy hunger. So that was learning theory's explanation of attachment. If some of these terms have been a little hard to understand, you might need to go back to the original learning theory video, where I go into some depth about classical and operant conditioning. Let's have a look now at some evaluations. First of all, a positive. Learning theory is quite a clear explanation for attachment. And the underlying theory of learning theory, the underlying theory of behaviourism, is very well backed up by a lot of research, mostly using animals, but mostly very carefully controlled research. Also, it does have face validity. It kind of makes sense that babies will cry more if they learnt that it gave them more attention. But of course there are many negative evaluations of this area of psychology. The interactions between caregivers and babies are by their very nature very complex. To explain the relationship between parents and their children as your stimulus response links and patterns of reinforcement is clearly just too simplistic, and we might suggest that it's environmentally reductionist. Another evaluation is a lot of the other theories provide evidence against the cupboard love theory. Hollow's research on macaques showed that the infant monkeys didn't attach to the wire surrogate mother that gave them milk, as learning theory would suggest, but they attached them to the cloth mother that didn't give milk, but provided contact comfort that wasn't necessary for its survival like food was, but seemed to provide some other function. And in the very next video, we're going to be talking about an alternate explanation for attachment. This doesn't depend on learning theory concepts, it depends on evolutionary explanations for attachment, suggesting we don't need to learn to become attached. We have an innate instinctual drive to form attachment with a primary caregiver. I really hope you found this video useful in studying psychology. 3 things help this channel grow a lot: likes, comments and subscriptions. Thank you so much if you've done any of those things for this video.